Buenos días, mi gente. Soy Luz Hernández, la directora ejecutiva de UNE y la madre de un adulto con autismo e impedimentos severos médicos. Estamos aquí hoy para dialogar sobre los servicios médicos de emergencia, conocido como EMS, como vieron anteriormente, y cómo podemos mejorar o facilitar los servicios. Reconocemos que la comunicación entre el personal de EMS y el paciente o su familia es crucial, como vimos en el video anteriormente, especialmente durante esos tiempos de emergencias. Uno de los enfoques hoy es cómo mejorar lingüísticamente y culturalmente y ser sensitivo. Así pues, es la razón por la cual estoy hablando español. Queremos que conozcan un poco lo difícil que es para personas hispanohablantes cuando ellos no entienden lo que está sucediendo. La mayoría de las personas aquí hoy son inglés hablantes. Así pues, sé que aunque no estemos corrientemente en una emergencia, se podría imaginar si estuviera en una y no entienden o no se pueden comunicar con el personal que está proveyendo el servicio de EMS. Igual como necesita la herramienta de esa emergencia, tal como oxígeno, una máquina de presión, también es importante los recursos que vas a necesitar para comunicarse con los pacientes y sus familias. ¿Por qué se pregunta? Porque podemos hacer un error que no se puede cambiar sin querer. Y ahora vamos a incluir nuestros colegas inglés hablantes para que ellos puedan comunicarse con nosotros. Hello, my name is Luz Hernández. I am the executive director of UNE and the parent of a young man with autism and severe medical needs. And yes, I was speaking Spanish purposefully. I explained one of the reasons why we were here in Spanish. How many people understand Spanish? Or did you understand what I was saying? If you did, raise your hand, put a smiley face, acknowledge that you understood. Now, for those of you who don't know Spanish, let's think about how it made you feel that you didn't understand me and or felt that you were left out. Kind of like the mom in the previous video understood, which she felt she wasn't able to really communicate with the EMS, or he wasn't really doing the active listening portion of it, right? Now let's consider, again, how the patient or the families feel, right? When there is an emergency and can't communicate their history of relevant information. Having the right tools is key during an emergency, just like having an IV or oxygen. Communication is equally as important. Of course, we ask why. Without communication, we all know that we can make a grave, irreversible mistake that none of us want to be responsible for. So with all that being said, let's look at what tools or strategies can help. Firstly, I want to mention that there is an emergency information form called EIF that the doctors can provide the families with that you can use. It is in English, and you can hand to first responders when there is an emergency. Dr. Tushi will be speaking later on EIFs and will give more detail about what it entails. Some counties also have live interpreters available via phone to assist with interpreting needs and or apps. So that's, could be very useful, but it does depend by the county. There's also a variety of translation apps that you can use using your smartphones, such as Google. There's iTranslate, Voice, and Microsoft Translator. They all have their limitations, but it's something that we can potentially use. There's also another app that I found called Sayhi, S-A-Y-H-I, which is supposedly a free interpreting software for Android phone users. Again, many of these apps are imperfect, if you will. They're just a tool that we can use when we're caught in those situations, but they're not foolproof, just to say. If you know of any apps that might be useful and you'd like to share, please put it in the chat so that we can all share those resources. Also, I want to just mention the fact, of course, there's communication boards I don't want to ignore. There's communication boards that are also very useful if you speak other languages. For first responders or companies, one of the things that we want to, of course, to consider is the community that you actually serve. What are the demographics? What are the languages that they speak? Is there anyone within your company that can assist with interpreting needs when the times arise? These are some things to consider also when hiring people, right? Providing culturally and linguistically appropriate personnel builds trust. So we all need to consider all these nuances, if you will, to ensure that the families that we serve are served well. And with the families, some tools and tips are to come on different methodologies, different things that you can do as well, just to help facilitate that communication to ensure that your child or your needs are best met.
Health literacy, now that we've heard from Luz about communication, right? So, the CDC definition is the degree to which the individual have the ability to find, understand, and use information and services to inform health-related decisions and actions for themselves and others. That is the definition that the Centers for Disease Control uses. Okay, people have the right to inform decision making, and they don't understand this is compromised. So a lot of times when we're talking to caregivers or people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, or even children with disabilities, they don't realize they have the right to informed decision making, right? They just go along with whatever other person say, but they really, they don't seem to understand that they have a say in their, in their own health due to health literacy. So, a lot of this is impacted by age, education, culture, and language. And so some tips to address health literacy and practices for both the parent and child's health literacy needs to be considered to avoid assumptions, use plain language, describe both what you are going to do and what you are doing. For example, I need to hold your wrist to check your pulse and help me understand, help me to understand how well your heart is working. So using language like "I need to check your pulse" is not the right approach for someone who have limited health literacy. Giving them a brief explanation would improve communication efforts and also make you more culturally sensitive. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly for more about this slide.
Thanks so much, William and Luz. Wow, what a great example that was. I want to talk to you just briefly about some of the alternative forms of communication. I had mentioned that, my son is nonverbal, but he does have different ways to express himself. And, communication can be hard enough when everything is calm. So unfortunately, when there are stressful situations, such as an emergency, as we saw, emotions and moods may not be our best for everybody who's involved. And of course, that can negatively impact communication. So it's important that we consider, some of these issues. Most people do communicate with spoken language, but that's not universal. There are many spoken languages with regional differences and differences in forms of sign language. And there are practically more forms of assistive technology than we can count. So, unfortunately, we can't even operate many of those things because we don't know how they work. There are so many of them. Some people, as Luz mentioned, use visuals while others communicate in written form. And if that isn't complex enough, all of the nonverbal communication through our body language additionally speaks volumes. These are some of the examples of some assistive technology or augmentative communication devices. They're both high tech and low tech. And just because you're pointing to something, do we really understand them? Again, without experience, it can be a challenge. We're all doing the best we can. Frankly, language is messy. And we put some of these in the toolkit for you, so be sure to check those out. We mentioned before we heard the little scenarios that there is an art to listening. It is not just about waiting to speak. It is about actively listening and really paying attention to what the person is saying. And that, that comes with practice. It just doesn't happen automatically. So do, as you're working with families, practice the dive listening. Listening isn't just a job for your ears. It's about the brain interpreting and understanding. So actively listening is really important and something that you need to work on. So, there are lots of variations in culture and language, which are intertwined. And I want to point out to you that the deaf and hard of hearing culture, even as we identify them, those words don't always sit well with people. Labels are often offensive. So there is a deaf culture. And so it's really important that we recognize that. And if you're able to learn about that, again, remember, we have a lot of great tips and tools for you in our toolkit. And we have some things about the deaf culture in there. In an emergency situation, it's not always perfect. And just because we read something about some tips for how to work with that population, a specific population, doesn't mean that in the moment we're going to be able to honor that. So again, do the best you can. And our best tool is our ears in this situation, and listening to what the family has to tell us so we can make the best experience for everyone. So again, learning about them ahead of time helps, but it's not everything. So again, the deaf and hard of hearing population can be a specific culture, and they may or may not be able to read your lips, and getting in their way can be offensive. So there are values and different aspects of the way that they interact and intersect that are unique, and they don't all communicate in the same way. The biggest issue here, I can say, is that everyone is unique, and that we need to do our best to learn so that we can respect those differences when we intersect with the various populations. Go ahead. So similarly, those with autism spectrum disorders vary, and some may have trouble with the noise of your siren, or maybe your uniform, or your flashing lights. They may have problems with your aftershave, and some could be aggressive or self-injurious. Some may not experience pain as you would expect. So pay particular attention to the parent who knows your child, listen to them carefully. And again, as I've been saying here, simply do your best to bring those pieces together and maximize the experience. The situations, as I said, can be difficult, and sometimes things heat up in a difficult situation, perhaps similar to that first scenario that we were able to view. And unfortunately, emotions can run high in an emergency situation. If and when that happens, it's important to try not to react, but to remain calm and not to take things personally. Everybody is doing the best that they can, you as well as the family and the individual. So validate the feelings, use short, simple sentences, and avoid telling others to calm down, which can actually inflate the situation. As we pointed out before, in the second scenario, they were asking questions. That was really helpful. It's important to balance proximity. When you're too close, it can be threatening to some people. So monitoring them and treating them is important. So maybe a little bit of dance of going back and forth, and then not crowding around people. As the one individual mentioned, the one EMT, distractions can be huge and can be very helpful. If you know of a special interest, using those to distract the individual. Do you want to bring your Kermit toy or your book along? Would you like to hold this? And then addressing the non-negotiables as needs. So I need you to, whatever it is, stay in your seat, keep your seatbelt on. None of us can control what happens in an emergency situation. However, what we can control is ourselves. So give a little grace, knowing that everybody is doing your best, and learn from your mistakes. And now that you've had all of this information, we're going to be putting it to use and calling on you here shortly to do a little bit of work with us. Remember that when we're in crisis, we feel out of control. And despite our best intentions, things can be very uncomfortable. So make sure that you are doing your best to keep things from heating up before they ever get there. And when they're there, use some of the tips and strategies. Again, resources are available in your toolkit, so take advantage of those. Give a little bit of grace and set aside your frustration, your judgments, your assumptions, any dismissive comments, and do your best to help in that situation with one another. Above all else, follow the parent's lead, very similar to the second scenario that we saw. Sometimes anxiety really fuels the repetitive questions that someone might ask. Validating feelings can help to diffuse those. I see you're very upset. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. Decide again what's negotiable and what's not, and watch that proximity.